regenerate his head once during the fight with the Hashiras. He may be able to do it multiple times, but we can't be sure of that. Therefore, if Muzan slashes his head multiple times, he would probably not be able to recover in time, and ultimately, the fight would end in the Demon King's favor, but it would definitely take some time. And now, the final question. What if all Upper Moons fought him together? In general, each Upper Moon is usually as strong as a Hashira. Some of them are even more powerful, comparable to the strength of 2 or more pillars. Even Shinobu agreed with this statement. Therefore, we can say that this would be similar to Muzan fighting a dozen Hashiras at the same time, which is more than he fought during the Sunrise Countdown arc. This would be the greatest battle of all Demon Slayer history, and Muzan will not be able to get out of this one easily. The fight would be much longer with all 7 of the Upper Moon demons working together, gradually weakening the Demon Lord and tiring him out. The Upper Moons would be at a significant advantage due to their strength and unique abilities, which they can combine to inflict massive damage on Muzan. At the very beginning of the fight, the Demon King would act quickly to take care of the weaker Upper Moons like Gyoko, Daki, and Gyutaro. Before they are killed, Gyoko and Gyutaro would use their special poisoning techniques on Muzan. It wouldn't do much at the time, but in the long run, it may weaken him a bit. Furthermore, as time goes on, Akaza and Kokoshiba would deal a lot of physical damage to Muzan. At the same time, Doma would use his powerful Blood Demon art and the powdered ice to poison Muzan even more. The fight would begin to wear the Demon King down, weakening him to the point that the Upper Moons now have a slight advantage over him. Eventually, near the end of the night, the Upper Moons would have wounded him enough to decapitate him, and the one to do it would be none other than the strongest of them all, Kokoshiba. However, let's not forget that Muzan is capable of regenerating his head, making him immune to death by decapitation. Although he wouldn't die, regenerating his head would wear down Muzan considerably, making it extremely hard for him to kill the remaining demons. The battle would eventually come to an end, with the sun rising and burning all the demons, including Muzan, to ashes. Therefore, the end of this incredibly long and impressive fight would be a tie, and none of them would be standing victorious at the end. Click on this video where we explain what would happen if Yorishi became a demon. Don't be shy, click it.
Nice spawns! Nice spawns, game. Are you serious right now?
In 1927, ESB started our mission.
He's a superhuman. He's never laid down in his life. He's a man who looks down on the very earth itself. He's proud, cold, and powerful. At all times, the perfect man. Luffy versus Katakuri, a highly controversial topic amongst One Piece fans, and to this very day there is still a lot of confusion as to who quote-unquote won this fight and how. It's definitely not a straightforward outcome, and it does require a bit of a journey in order to reach our destination. One that is surprisingly not presented within our protagonist Luffy, and in order to really dive into this topic, we need to set our sights on his opponent, Charlotte Katakuri. Born 48 years ago to his tyrannical mother and Emperor of the Sea, Charlotte Linlin. At the age of 2, Katakuri tasted a donut for the very first time, immediately adopting them as his favoritist of foods. Although due to eating too many of them far too quickly, Katakuri's cheeks tore apart. These scars, of course, made him a prime target for bullying with various other children things, who labeled him as a pelican eel. At one stage, his older brother, Perispera, suggested that Katakuri would be able to make friends if he just covered his mouth. However, not wanting to compromise who he was, Katakuri simply replied, "Forget it. This is me. If they laugh, I'll just beat him up." Although that would result in quite an unintended consequence, as the bullies took revenge by beating up Katakuri's younger sister, Charlotte Brûlé. Katakuri immediately blamed himself. He had been too soft, naive, and even selfish. So he came up with a solution to become a person so overwhelmingly powerful that nobody would dare harm those he loved. "I'll show no weakness. I'll make them fear my perfection." And over the next 38 years, Katakuri would hone his strength and status, rising to become a sweet commander of the Big Mom Pirates, but more importantly, Katakuri successfully built his image of fearsome perfection, with all sorts of wild rumors spreading across Totterland. He's a superhuman. He's never laid down in his life. He's a man who looks down on the very earth itself. He is proud, cold, and powerful. At all times, the perfect man. Even Katakuri himself believed this image. He was the very embodiment of perfection, and someone so feared that nobody would ever dare lay a hand on his family ever again. And you know, that's a very common state of mind for One Piece antagonists. They all tend to think they have things more or less figured out. That that is until they come face to face with a certain pirate captain named Monkey D. Luffy. With chapter 825, we began the Whole Cake Island arc, the climax of which was centered around a delightful tea party being held in Totterland, which was then promptly crashed by Luffy and friends of Luffy, who was here to rescue one of his crew members, an action that would soon forcibly throw him into direct conflict with Katakuri. Before that though, it's important to understand what Luffy presents to Katakuri. This sloppy, goofy, moronic, rubber dude man is the embodiment of imperfection. He is simultaneously loud, arrogant, and weak. So weak that he clearly doesn't even have the power to protect those dear to him, as shown by the mere fact that he had to travel all the way to Whole Cake Island in the first place. And worst of all, look at that scar under his eye. Luffy doesn't even have the sense to cover it up. This man's shameful imperfection is on display for the entire world to see, and what's worse is that he doesn't care. Boiling it down to basics, Luffy and Katakuri's goals aren't that different from one another. They both want to protect those they hold dear, but Luffy is such a half-baked and half-assed incarnation that it serves as an insult to everything Katakuri stands for. And furthermore, Luffy was a threat, an embarrassing yet chaotic force, unbound by traditional logic that needed to be dealt with right here and now, lest Katakuri's family be put at risk. And it would be at this moment that something very surprising happened. Luffy, having seen Katakuri as a similar threat to his own crew, took the initiative and forced the Sweet Commander into a realm known as the Mirror World, a sort of pocket dimension created by the devil fruit abilities of Katakuri's sister Brûlée. Upon entering, Luffy immediately shattered the exit, effectively sealing himself in there with Katakuri, thrusting both of them into what would be a life-altering battle. Although with that said, some say that Luffy was actually attempting to smash the subscribe button for the Grand Line Review, which would have resulted in a consistent injection of One Piece culture uploaded straight into his YouTube feed. Of course, Katakuri being perfect, he had already done that, so I'd recommend that we all follow Katakuri's example, and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. And so the opening skirmish began, yielding yet another surprise for both combatants in regards to their devil fruit abilities. Luffy, as the user of the Gomu Gomu no Mi, a Paramecia type that obviously turned his body into rubber, got quite a shock when he discovered that Katakuri had consumed a curious fruit named the Mochi Mochi no Mi, a special Paramecia that allowed him to manipulate and become mochi, which is like a sticky sort of Japanese rice cake, quite delicious. The end result being that these two actually possessed extraordinarily similar abilities, which allowed Katakuri to mimic Luffy's techniques, or allowed Luffy to mimic Katakuri's techniques, depending on which way you want to look at it. And whilst Katakuri didn't quite understand this yet, he was essentially fighting a direct reflection of himself, a man with the same powers and the same goals who had simply elected to achieve them via a very different philosophy. Luffy is what Katakuri may have become if he'd stuck to his childlike mindset in regards to not caring about how others viewed him. And of course, we should point out that rather appropriately, Katakuri was fighting this reflection of himself in a literal mirror world, so there's that. With a few key differences, one of which being that Katakuri was Luffy's superior in almost every way. He was stronger, faster, more efficient, and his devil fruit allowed him extra degrees of utility that Luffy's did not. And he also had one more very key advantage, being Katakuri's possession of advanced observation haki, which was honed so thoroughly that he could even see briefly into the future. Luffy was completely outmatched, failing to land even a single blow. And I want to make this very clear right here and now. Physically, there was no path to victory for Luffy, and as such, he was eventually swallowed up by Katakuri's mochi. Like, literally swallowed, not a fancy metaphor. At which point Katakuri considered this a job well done, good, and called upon his personal chefs waiting in the wings. You see, Katakuri has something of a daily ritual known as a merienda, which is basically glorified snacky time, whereby Katakuri sequesters himself in a private area to relax and eat his beloved donuts in peace, or that's usually the idea anyway. Because on this occasion, Luffy had used his special technique of eating his way out of any situation to escape his mochi-related demise, proceeding to shatter Katakuri's private room to discover what can only be described as this. He's a superhuman. He's never laid down in his life. He's a man who looks down on the very earth itself. He is proud, cold, and powerful. At all times, the perfect man. Perfect, eh? Hastily, Katakuri leapt into action like a teenager whose parents had just walked in on them using the internet, immediately murdering his private chefs who had viewed the scene and re-engaged Luffy. But by now, it was too late. There was no getting this toothpaste back into the tube. The illusion of perfection had been completely shattered, and Luffy was able to take advantage of this by landing his very first hit of the fight. I thought you were invincible. My punches went right through you. I thought they didn't work, but I was wrong. my attacks can hit you. And indeed they could, but it's not because of anything Luffy did, rather it was because of the state of emergency that Katakuri had been plummeted into mentally. This was an unprecedented crisis because not only did his opponent now believe that he was not invincible, but Katakuri also needed to grapple with that idea himself. 4 decades of building this perfect image had been eviscerated in mere seconds. It gave Katakuri a very stark look at reality, one that he could no longer deny. And rather interestingly, Luffy never actually commented on what he saw, which was a very new sensation for Katakuri. During his childhood, people had always been quick to point out Katakuri's scars, but Luffy's only concern was that their fight wasn't over, making Luffy quite possibly the only person in Katakuri's entire life who had not immediately judged him for his scars. Alas, their fight did continue. Katakuri maintained his overwhelming physical advantages, sending Luffy flat into the ground time after time after time again, many countless of times. However, beneath all of this, a secondary battle was being waged, one on the mental plane where Luffy had acquired a distinct advantage. Because as much as there was an impossible obstacle standing in his way, Luffy's mind was relatively clear. Meanwhile, Katakuri was placed in an ever deteriorating state, coming to question himself, as well as, quite frankly, his